morning to everyone here with us today and those watching online via the YEDEU official YouTube website. Today, 14th of May 2026, marks the second and final day of the 13th International Communications Day, organized by the faculties of communication at Üsküdar and Near East University. It has been some time since generative AI and AI-integrated technologies have long transcended science fictional foresight and became part of our lived reality. These technologies are now with us and are increasingly playing a role in shaping the conditions through which we live, communicate, and think. We are not merely using AI technologies, we are increasingly living alongside and through them. Yet, while the political, economic, cultural, and social dimensions of living with AI continues to raise important concerns from a variety of perspectives, we also have scholar practitioners and academics, such as our first keynote speaker today, who shed light on alternative possibilities, different ways of thinking, and more critical approaches to AI. Without further ado, I'm honored to present today's distinguished lineup of keynote speakers. Professor Paula Nuno Vicente will invite us to engage with an important philosophical inquiry into how we approach research with and on AI. Then Professor Lina Dessings will help us rethink what the state is and where it might be leading in the future. Finally, Dr. Nick Sinerick will unpack the political economy of platform industries, drawing attention to the political consequences emerging from the political economy of a polarized world. I'll introduce you to our first keynote speaker shortly, following a brief greeting in Turkish. Günaydın, burada bizimle olan ve YEDEU resmi web sitesi üzerinden bizleri çevrimiçi olarak takip eden herkese merhaba. Bugün 14 Mayıs 2026 Üsküdar Üniversitesi ve Yakın Doğu Üniversitesi İletişim Fakülteleri tarafından düzenlenen 13. Uluslararası İletişim Günleri'nin ikinci ve son günündeyiz. Üretken yapay zeka ve yapay zeka entegre teknolojilerin bilim kurguya ait bir öngörü olmaktan çıkıp yaşantımızın gerçeğinin bir parçası haline gelmesinin üzerinden epey zaman geçti. Bu teknolojiler artık hayatımızın içinde ve yaşama, iletişim kurma ve düşünme biçimlerimizi şekillendiren koşullar arasında yer alıyor. Yapay zeka sadece kullandığımız bir teknoloji değil, giderek yapay zeka ile birlikte ve onun aracılığıyla yaşayan özneler haline geliyoruz. Yapay zeka ile yaşamanın siyasal, ekonomik, kültürel ve toplumsal boyutları farklı perspektiflerden önemli tartışmaları ve kaygıları gündeme getirmeye devam ediyor ki bütün dün ve bugün süren panellerimizde bunları görüyoruz. Öte yandan bugün ilk keynote konuşmacımızın değineceği üzere alternatif olasılıkları, farklı düşünme biçimlerini ve yapay zekaya yönelik daha eleştirel yaklaşımlara ışık tutan araştırmacı pratisyenler ve akademikler de var. Sözü daha fazla uzatmadan bugün sizlere seçkin keynote konuşmacılarımızı takdim etmekten gurur duyuyorum. Profesör Paula Nuno Vicente yapay zeka ile ve yapay zeka üzerine yürütülen araştırmalara nasıl yaklaşmamız gerektiğine dair önemli bir felsefik sorgulamaya bizi davet edecek. Ardından Profesör Lina Dessing devletin ne olduğu ve yakın gelecekte nasıl bir yöne evrilebileceğini tartışacak. Son olarak Dr. Nick Sinerick ise platform endüstrisinin altında yatan dinamikleri mercek altına alarak kutuplaşmış dünyanın politik ekonomisinden doğan siyasal sonuçlara dikkat çekecek. Evet, ilk keynote konuşmacımız Nova Üniversitesi Lizbon'dan Profesör Paula Nuno Vicente. Nova İletişim Enstitüsü'nün direktörü olan Profesör Vicente, dijital medya, yapay zeka, sürükleyici hikaye anlatımı, bilim iletişimi ve dijital dönüşüm alanlarında akademik çalışmaları bulunan bir araştırmacı. Kurucularından olduğu iNova Media Lab, yeni teknolojilerin toplumsal ve kültürel etkilerinin araştırıldığı önemli bir transdisipliner araştırma platformu. Bugünkü konuşmasında özellikle önemli kılan nokta yapay zekanın yalnızca toplumları değil, beşeri ve sosyal bilimleri bilgi üretim süreçlerini de nasıl dönüştüreceğine odaklanması. Yani başka bir ifadeyle yapay zeka artık araştırdığımız bir nesne değil, araştırmanın epistemolojik koşullarını da dönüştüren bir yapı haline geliyor. Bugün bizlere The Emergence of AI in the Humanities and Social Sciences from the Rarefication of the Object of Study to the Renewal of Research Agenda başlıklı keynote konuşmasını bizlerle paylaşacak. Birazdan İngilizce takdimden sonra sözü kendisine bırakacağım. Today, our first keynote speaker is Professor Paolo Nuno Vicente from Nova University, Lisbon, who's with us now online. Professor Vicente is an associate professor of digital media and director of the Nova Institute of Communication, where his work brings together digital communication, immersive storytelling, artificial intelligence, science communication, and innovation in media practices. He's also one of the founders of the Innova Media Lab, an important transdisciplinary space dedicated to exploring the social and cultural implications of emerging technologies. What makes Professor Vicente's contribution particularly valuable today is his sustained engagement with the question of how artificial intelligence is reshaping not only society, but also the very conditions of knowledge production within the humanities and social sciences. In other words, AI is no longer simply an object we study. It is increasingly becoming part of the epistemological environment through which research itself is conducted. His keynote, The Emergence of AI in the Humanities and Social Sciences from the Rarefication of the Object of Study to the Renewal of Research Agendas, invites us to rethink the future of academic inquiry itself. And I am delighted to hand over the floor to Professor Vicente for their keynote speech. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. It's really a nice pleasure, a great pleasure to be here. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really, I would like to congratulate you for organizing this opportunity that brings us together in thinking about AI in our different fields and overall social sciences. So I will try, of course, to stick to the time, but very briefly, I would like to share with you a presentation, which is, well, I tried to organize it in four, not so if you can see it. Can you see the presentation or not really? Not sure if you, okay, thank you so much. Thank you. So very briefly, I'll try to share with you the structure of this talk, and I organize it, to be honest, as setting the scene, aware of the other two colleagues that are coming after. So I will, of course, start with very briefly examine not only some definitions of AI, but not entering too deep into that challenging line of thought, but also on some representations and prefigurations of artificial life throughout history, which I think can help us see in a different perspective the theme that we are addressing today. So I would like to, in a second stage, to address the concept of socio-technical imaginaries, being aware that besides researchers, we may have with us also other, for instance, PhD students, I guess, and also addressing directly what I call in the initial stage, of course, the rarefaction of the object of study in the social study of AI, what we call the social study of AI. And then I will conclude, or actually opening the field actually, to the renewal of research agendas. I will, of course, I think it's crucial to start and very briefly contextualize the term artificial intelligence. Of course, I will not do a full historiography of the term, but I think it's really important in a time where or when artificial intelligence today serves as kind of a overall all-encompassing umbrella, or if you want, what political scientists Ernesto Laclau referred in the past as an empty signifier, so meaning a signifier that lacks a fixed and very defined meaning, but instead is filled with various meanings depending on the political and social context that the term is used. So today, or over the last decades, the term AI in the field of AI has become so vast and complex due to its multidisciplinary interconnection that, for instance, the high-level expert group on AI established by the European Commission felt necessary not only to explicitly state that the operational definition it uses it's inevitably a oversimplification, but also to visually situate artificial intelligence as a sort, let's call it, of plasma connecting these fields of machine learning, reasoning or logic, and robotics. So very briefly, I will suggest, and at least from a functional, then later a critical, but for now a functional point of view, we can understand artificial intelligence in 3 different layers. So the first, I think it's really important to start there, as a scientific domain and a fundamental research or a basic research area. So formally, AI, which traditional is mentioned as an emerging or a new technology. Well, so if we, in a rigorous approach, AI as a concept at least is, or as a research domain, is almost 70 years old. So tracing back, of course, to the initial 1956 meeting organized by the so-called Dartmouth group, so led by John McCarthy. Of course, we could refer previously to Alan Turing and other researchers working in the development of computer science, etc. But in this strict sense, the scientific domain of AI is and was defined by the goal of simulating human intelligence on computers. So a second and very important, by the way, layer is, of course, and today we deal daily with this layer, so is AI as a technological development and applied research. So this is the realm of computational artifacts, so the concrete digital systems that today proliferate in our daily lives, and consequently it is also the sphere of action for great, really big, so the so-called big tech, so the big technology companies and organizations. So last, I think it's really important to bring it as a third layer. So as it describes this transition from a computational function transform into an anthropomorphic attribute, more specifically the attribute of logical capacity. So very commonly described as the ability of these systems to learn, as in machine learning. And this is actually this inference capabilities precisely the characteristic that the European Parliament in the, I think, well-known AI Act, so the European Regulation for AI, uses in order to distinguish AI systems from simpler, let's call it traditional software systems. So having established these very simple definitions, so I would like to move to kind of a fundamental premise, so that technology and by causal connection, AI, of course, is an integral part of culture and society and not a kind of invasive entity. So more specifically, that the creation of ideas, narratives, figurations, or representations about AI has been a millennia-old aspect of human history. So this is really an interesting path for research. Of course, I will not be too long on this, but nevertheless, I would like to show you some very brief examples of this, so that the imagination and storytelling surrounding forms of artificial life, being it entities or machines, so are not an eccentricity of modern academic departments of computer science or biotechnology and robotic labs. Actually, you can find it in several classic and foundational works, and mythological history actually reveals how ancient Greek, Roman, Indian, and Chinese civilizations, despite lacking, of course, the technology that today we have, they anticipated and prefigured ideas that we now associate with concepts such as the automaton, the robot, the device, and the computer. So, for instance, the creator that falls in love with the creation, as in the Pygmalion and Galatea myth from Ovid, we may find an early manifestation in European culture of the now called techno solutionism. So, in this sense, in very specific sense, we can understand classic mythology as a sort of embryonic form of science fiction that today was already mentioned. So, of course, these prefigurations of AI are also very contemporary of us. They are not confined to classic antiquity. So they have also been and are today abundant for many decades in media production. I'll just touch here two levels. So let me begin with journalistic narrative, which I think is really an important one in this field. So, because it shapes, of course, the public shapes the perspective the perspectives that we use to think about AI and other technologies. So here we can see, just to give you an example. So this is a 1958 New York Times article. So so only 2 years after the formal creation of the field of AI, or at least the creation, the Dartmouth Group Summer Institute. So in this piece translates so it's a news on the first electronic mechanism designed to emulate the functioning of a human synapse. So it's called the perceptron. And we can see that since the founding of the scientific field of AI, we find both dreams and inflated perspectives, along with their amplified portrayal in media coverage. So I think this is particularly evident in this piece, in the headline. So I'm talking about 1958, so already the electronic brain that teach itself. So, of course, these contemporary prefigurations are also very, very and deeply in depth to artistic creation, particularly literary and cinematic works. And the literary genre of science fiction has played for several decades a crucial role in shaping public imagination around AI. So by creating imaginary worlds where AI is an integral part of society, authors such as Isaac Asimov, Philip K. Dick, Arthur C. Clarke, and others, of course, have explored and, of course, giving us to develop a critical thinking on the technological possibilities, ethical dilemmas, particularly, and social challenges, often anticipating contemporary debates. So each of these, 3 books was adapted into film. Of course, we could use here also video games as an illustration of these narratives. But I was saying each of those 3 books was adapted into film and resulting in canonical works into science fiction genre, in particular exploring the theme of AI. So setting this a little bit the scene, I would like to bring in the relevance of the concept of socio-technical imaginaries. So in science and technology studies, the concept of socio-technical imaginaries has increasingly documented how political, scientific, and technological discourse plays a crucial role in projecting social worlds or if you prefer, mentally and materially constructing imagined futures. So these socio-technical imaginaries, and I'm using Shaila's Asanov definition, so reside in this reservoir of norms and discourses, metaphors, and cultural meanings, while projecting visions of what is good, desirable, and worth achieving for a specific political community. So I will give you just a brief example of this. So the World Economic Forum is well known to bring together business leaders, policymakers, media representatives, and it presents itself as an international organization dedicated to public-private cooperation to shape global, regional, and industrial agendas. And then this notion of the fourth industrial revolution, which I'm pretty sure that you all are aware of, so corresponds precisely to this premise of, or proposal, if you want, of a profound systemic change associated with the pervasive power of the so-called technological megatrend. So namely, artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, 3D printing, etc. What I would like to suggest is that one way to study this or the public presence of this fourth industrial revolution is by cross-referencing, if you want, with the concept of socio-technical imaginaries as proposed by Asanov, which incorporates a dimension of public performative activity. So just sharing a kind of a small work that I undertook a few years ago, trying to study the public performance of the fourth industrial revolution as conveyed by, in this case, the Portuguese national press, so all over, or from 2013 to 2020. So trying to integrate the operational capacity of socio-technical imaginaries concept with the legacy of media framing studies. So in this case, this made it clear that what we could call the dominant socio-technical imaginary at the time surrounding, or in Portugal, of course, in Portuguese media, surrounding the fourth industrial revolution was at the time driven by economic and financial agencies that you can see it on the top, so who were predominant in almost 70% of the sample. And for instance, that in a marked contrast to the voices addressing social implications, science and technology policies, and very important, so environment and sustainability questions, which were almost absent from the public, let's call it socio-technical imaginary, being developed by the news media. So this is therefore the moment to ask ourselves, how have the social sciences and humanities, and particularly the media and communication studies, appropriated artificial intelligence across time as a research phenomenon, if you will. So of course I will need to explain this metaphor that I'm using. So the rarefaction of the object of study. This, of course, is the metaphor as found in the rarefaction of oxygen, for instance, at high altitudes that corresponds to lower density of the air. And this precisely, if you look at the beginning, or if you do a search for the last 20 years, this lower density, we can find it actually in the beginning of this century, if you look at the field of communication and the explicit study of AI. So this graph, to make it clear, so illustrates the number of articles published in Web of Science indexed journals within the field of communication. So it's just a small slice of the social sciences domain, but it's within the field of communication from 2000 to 2023. So we might say that using that metaphor, so the rarefaction So the lower density, in this instance, lower intellectual density, if you will, is found at the base of these mountains. So this, of course, it is important to make it clear. I'm referring to the explicit use of artificial intelligence in research by media scholars. So, of course, it was during this period that we witnessed two correlated phenomena at great speed. First, the platformization of our lives or of digital experience. So that is the materialization of a World Wide Web in proprietary domains that of social media platforms. So accompanied here in the graph, I'm sorry for the Portuguese in the byline. So accompanied by the corresponding study or platform studies emergence. So if we look, and I will like to share with you some graphs. So despite the fact that the term artificial intelligence for almost 20 years was not used explicitly to conduct research in this field, we of course we may find the studies of platforms such as Twitter, YouTube, or now X, of course, Facebook. And this is really important because to bring different authors that have decisively contributed to the densification or of this line of study, so and to the concept of platformization. Of course, is with particularly happy to emphasize the work of Nick Czarnecek that will be here with us today. So it's a really great pleasure to refer the very important work that developed around, let's call it the specific economic model in which digital platforms operate. But also, of course, with other colleagues such as José van Dijk, highlighting the social and cultural and economic ongoing reconfiguration, and Shoshana Zuboff around the market form that monetizes personal data through surveillance and behavioral analysis. So all these contributions I would like to suggest that converge on the recognition of the second phenomenon, which is the datafication of social life. So that is the codification of our attitudes, predispositions, and actions into numerical representations, and of course their storage in relational databases and their monetization. So in simple terms, the extraction of social, political, and economic capital from information about our social and psychological life as expressed in the realm of these digital platforms. So the concept of algorithmic capital is now, I think, an important one to analyze the power exerted in society through the various platforms that incorporate AI. So this concept of algorithmic capital is, let's call it, an emanation of the seminal work of French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, who in 1972 described how different forms of capital, so economic, social, cultural, and symbolic, are used by individuals and groups to maintain and reproduce their social position within the power structure of a society. So today, these social environments are particularly composed of digital habitus. So thus the possession and extraction of algorithmic capital is now a form of power. So this what I like to overall call the social study of artificial intelligence in a certain way is inseparable from the foundation of the field of science and technology studies. So this work is a foundational work by Bruno Latour and Steve Woolgar, published in 1979. So it's really a seminal piece in science and technology studies. It was one of the first to address scientific practice from an anthropological and sociological perspective, so challenging the traditional view of science as a purely objective and rational activity. So I'm establishing here a direct connection with, of course, the study of the technological world, as we'll be seeing. So it is actually important to note that 6 years later, so in 1985, so the co-author of Bruno Latour, and I'm pretty sure that Bruno Latour is well known now, probably more than Steve Woolgar. So, but Steve Woolgar would publish this article, and I think this is really an important article in this kind of timeline. So, establishing the relevance and need for a sociology of machines. So, focused on studying the interactions between human and technical artifacts and treating technologies as actors that integrate into social networks. So, that's applying the well-known actor network theory. So in the 80s and 90s, we also find the contributions of Diana Forsyth, embracing the understanding of AI from an anthropological perspective and highlighting how the practices of developing AI systems are intertwined with specific cultural and social context. So in other words, AI as a cultural artifact. The works of Latour and Woolgar, as well as this posthumous work by Diana Forsyth, which gathers her main contributions, by the way, as the anthropological study of AI, so have contributed to more recent endeavors in the social sciences in the study of AI and robotic culture, such as this by Kathleen Richardson, so particularly related with robotics and AI, and informing what is today referred to as algorithmic culture. So illustrating how culture has been practiced or is being practiced, experienced and understood in renewed forms driven by data and algorithms rather than solely by human intervention. So even before the end of the second decade of the 2000s, so witness also the emergence of a line of studies known or now known as critical algorithmic studies. So I'm just showcasing three works and their corresponding authors, of course, Frank Pascal, Thornton Gillespie, and Tanya Burger, that are essential contributions affirming the relevance of the social study and political study, cultural study of AI. So building on these and other works, of course, a rich research has been established around issues such as algorithmic transparency and opacity, the notion of bias and algorithmic discrimination and their social, cultural, and political impact. So this is now a pathway in solid theoretical and empirical consolidation around the establishment of a sociology of algorithms. And as we mentioned earlier, so it is in depth to the work of Pierre Bourdieu and now proposes machines, or AI machines if you want, as sociological objects and algorithmic habitus as an instance of study. I would like to propose that this study of algorithmic mediation establishes the relationship with the concept of domestication of technologies and media, proposed already in the 90s by Roger Silverstone concerning television and its growing presence at the time in everyday life. So today, I think a parallel is evident between television and so television in the 70s and 80s, of course, and the current contemporary multiple mediations based on artificial intelligence technologies incorporated into our daily routines and their conversion into identities and social practice. So therefore, the domestication of algorithmic mediation as a process of bringing under control the wild animal of artificial intelligence. So, of course, more recently, we have also witnessed a renewed contribution akin, let's call it, to a reappropriation of the legacy of the Frankfurt School surrounding the proposal of a critical theory of artificial intelligence. So, having reviewed very, very briefly this kind of overview of the study of the art, I think it's important to establish the contributions of the field all over the last 20 years or even more. I'd like to now move towards the conclusion, actually, to follow the time of this presentation with a proposal or kind of synthesis for research and as well as teaching. I think it's really important. So a proposal for research and teaching pathways. So an agenda for what we could call the social relevance of the communication sciences and social sciences and humanities in face of AI. So I tried to summarize this proposal around 3 simple axes, which I'm here illustrating with particularly relevant works for each of them. Of course, there are plenty more. So the first axis, that I would like to propose, of course, AI communication or the communication of AI, that we can designate as a meeting point between the tradition of mediatization studies and new socio-technical complexes of communication. So in practice, this involves the study of narratives, representations, socio-technical imaginaries, as shown. So in this presentation, I show some context of study, so the news media, literature media, but also I would like to suggest that now digital media themselves and forms of assessing information such as search engines and particularly generative AI are also or can also be important places or locus of studies. So for instance, to study the generative representations of social life. The second axis, so communication, and not just communication, but if you want life through or by AI. So this is already the sphere where we find work, for instance, regulated by productivity algorithms. So the transfer actually of tasks to humans. So it's what is called the artificial intelligence. And here we can find, of course, really important social phenomena as the gig economy, microtasking, the work of content moderators in platforms that often may be foreseen as the work and the conquest of computational and artificial intelligence tasks, but very often they are conducted by hidden work or ghost work, if you want, by humans. So it's really important, in my view, to make this explicit and to bring it to the surface of our research endeavors. So also a third axis, so that we could call the communication with AI. So following the increasingly established line of studies on human-machine communication, so the integration of AI systems, whether corporeal or robotic or not, into social environments and everyday life, particularly more and more domestic life. So just to give you an example, so different materializations of AI are now proliferating in different contexts of what has been called artificial sociability. And the study of artificial sociability aims precisely to analyze how AI technologies designed to simulate or imitate social behavior influence human thoughts, emotions, actions. In these images, for instance, we see the adoption of robotic systems as an intervention for the senior population, but several other examples exist in case of, for instance, in interventions for junior populations, such as in pediatrical hospital wards and etc. So it's really important, in my view, to bring to the surface of our research this ongoing presence of forms of artificial sociability that are deeply transforming what we have as we have lived in the last decades. So I'd like to conclude, and of course I'm trying to stick to the time. Thank you very much for the time, and of course I'll be very glad to engage with Q&A afterwards, and of course really look forward to follow the presentations of other colleagues. So thank you so much once more for your invitation and for your time and patience to follow me in the last 35 minutes. Thank you.
Enriched presentation. It was very, particularly for me, my field of sociology of childhood, and the divide between the epistemological divide between doing research on and with children is quite a distinct one that kind of locates the scholar somewhere. But this, in your presentation, this very clear And with that, I'd like to, I think yesterday what we did was we did the Q&A after each and every lecture. So I'm going to turn around to the hall first to see if there are any questions. And I think we are, with my eyesight and dyslexia, it's very hard. I'm going to go over to there to see if I can. Oop. Right. We've got a question. How do you think artificial intelligence will reshape the future of communication studies and the career prospects of communication graduates? I think you've already sort of addressed the first half of that question, but I suppose what does the future of AI hold for communication graduates?
Thank you so much for the hard question. I'm not sure if should I answer already or wait for. Can I answer or?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay. So, I'm just asking because we have been with some audio issues. So, well, thanks for putting a very hard question. Of course, I think that overall that's it's a question that I think currently appears as an existential framing in several lines of work and domains. So as if machines and AI systems are taking over. Well, first of all, I think it is up to us. So in the sense that I always resist to the certain sense of technological determinism that as if we have no power and will to define as a communities what futures will be or will be like in the several domains. So I think I in a certain sense the question is also asking what's the nature of academic work, and this I think it is also it's the case in my view when we ask for instance, I think this is a really hard question. So what will be like teaching the work of teachers and professors in the coming decades? So I think that we very often throw away, as it calls, it's not a beautiful metaphor, but throw away the baby with the bathwater. So in the sense that this is a moment that we are called and interpolated to define and secure, in a certain sense, to stress what we think ourselves of this social institution. So not how we do this task or that task, but what we really want from education, from health systems, from politicians. And I think the question brings that. So I see that, of course, there are, from a very operational point of view, opportunities to ourselves as researchers I think the most clear of all is how we can use these systems or these technologies to work with, if that's the way that we want to go, to work with very complex and multimodal data. So there are, let's call it, pragmatical benefits in some sense, but of course this very often came also with some more gray areas. And I think that it's not any technology that will dismiss our social role. I think that we are now overall living a particular moment in time, for all the complexities that come from this field. So in particularly the connection between the development of these technologies and company power and political power. So if we look to the past, and sorry to digress a little bit, so if we look at the 20th century, very often the nation state, if you want, has had a war. Of course, I will use a very dramatic example, for instance, nuclear power. But the nation and countries and communities or political communities have had a word to say in the regulation and use of these emerging technologies. Nowadays, I think this change significantly, and if we look on who and where is the power to define how the world is moving, or the technological world is moving, I think we should be bringing into account that, of course, the great technological companies. So this, returning to your question, I think there are, from a very, if you want, very specific and pragmatical technical point of view, there are new tasks emerging in this mix of new ways of conducting research. But of course, social research or research in society and culture will be needed more than ever. So I think if you are concerned with career, in the sense, which is what was the term used, I think you should not, if you are really engaged with that, that will not be a problem, because more than ever we have more than important challenges to address.
Thank you very much. I suppose it was really implied. It kind of really depends on what we're going to do with the higher education institution to begin with. We need to know that to be able to answer what's going to happen to communication graduates, I suppose. So hence the highlight that you did at the very beginning of the answer of staying away from a technological determinist perspective is really, I think, quite crucial. So again, I'm with the whole, and there's a question if we can, the microphone is just coming.
So, Mr. Vicente, my question is, AI did not create itself, we created it, but it's very obvious that it will not remain under the control of human beings. So do you think communication by AI will remain under the control of the people? Is there a way to keep it under the control of human beings, or will it remain out of control of the people? Can we rule communication by AI in the future? in short.
Thanks. Something that always strikes me and I think that's also why it is really important to question and to address the socio-technical imagination or imaginaries around emerging technologies, and particularly in this case AI, is that we are always projecting our questions into the future. So, and I think as if the present and the importance of presence did not exist. So I think that, so if we look at what is happening in platforms and all, and sorry for the term, garbage that is being produced not only visually but also in, if you want to, audio and music platforms. So already systems recreating from other musics and generating more and more and more. So I think the term regulation and the term intervention are really needed. That's why I think if we have learned something from the last 26 years or 25 years, is that this field is too important to be left to self-regulation. Yes, we are sure of the power, and of course that comes with economic capital associated with the big tech and how this is being developed. But I wouldn't like to give up on our role to maintain control. So I do not, of course, this narrative is usually also in this kind of pendulum between, so AI will free us to do whatever we want with our free time, to the other side of the pendulum, which is the Terminator. So it will to take power and take us to extinction. So I think in the middle is what we call the political decisions and our social definitions of what is acceptable, not necessarily what is possible, but what is really social acceptable. And I think that's why I was previously mentioning the crucial moment that we are living, where political power, tech power, are really more and more interconnected. And I do strongly believe that we are all calling to action in bringing this the complex and of course the harm that some decisions or that our indecision can bring to this. So I think the future will not be technological or should not be technologically defined, but defined by us. And I think that's of course possible, as we did with other sort of technologies in the past. So this is actually by then I will finish by saying this, that it is really striking and sometimes worrying and sometimes frustrating also that we tend to project to AI, and I think this is a result of the, let's call, marketing power that John McCarthy implied with the word artificial intelligence, that we try to very often to project into AI characteristics or kind of a sort of exceptional regime that we do not apply to other technologies. And I think that is really should not be the case. So I think we can learn with other technologies, and this can be, since the safety belt in automobiles or cars to nuclear power. So there are several. I think we need to decide what is acceptable for us as communities and for democratic regimes, by the way. So, and which is not acceptable, and of course this is an ongoing struggle. So it will not be easier or clean, if you want, but we need to address this.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Still? there aren't any questions, I suppose, considering the time as well, I'm going to move on to our next keynote speaker. Thank you very much, Professor Vicente. Hope you stay with us. If we have time,
Will. Thank you.
Can join together after all the three presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your kind questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Evet, şimdi sizlere Goldsmith University of London'dan Profesör Lina Denzig'i takdim etmekten gurur duyuyorum. Profesör Denzig, yapay zeka adaleti alanında çalışmalar yapan bir akademisyen olmanın yanı sıra ayrıca üniversite araştırma lideri görevini sürdürmekte. Uluslararası ölçekte etkili çalışmalara imza atan Data Justice Lab'ın kurucu direktörlerinden biri kendisi. Çalışmaları veri yönetişimi, gözetim, dijital yurttaşlık ve yapay zekanın politik sonuçları üzerine yoğunlaşıyor. Devletlerin giderek daha fazla dijital altyapılar ve teknoloji şirketleri aracılığıyla toplumsal yaşamı yönetmeye başladığı günümüzde Profesör Denzig'in çalışmaları güç, hesap verebilirlik ve eşitsizlik meselelerine kritik bir perspektif sunuyor. Data Justice and Digital Citizenship in the Data Field Society gibi yayınların algoritmik yönetimselliğin toplumsal sonuçlarına dair tartışmalarının şekillenmesinde önemli rol oynadı. Bugünkü keynote konuşması From Welfare to Tenant State, State-Tech Relations in an Age of AI başlığını taşıyor. İngilizce takvimden sonra sözü Sayın Profesör Denzig'e bırakacağım. Hello again, it's a pleasure to introduce Professor Lina Denzig from Goldsmith University of London. Professor Denzig is professor and university research leader in AI justice, as well as the coordinator and director of the internationally influential Data Justice Lab. Her work has been central to contemporary discussions on data, governance, surveillance, digital citizenship, and political implications of artificial intelligence. At a time when states are increasingly rely on technological infrastructures and private digital platforms to govern social life, Professor Denzig's research asks urgent questions about power, accountability, and inequality in the data field societies. Her publications, including Data Justice published by Sage in 2022 and Digital Citizenship in a Data Field Society published by Polity in 2018, have significantly shaped debates surrounding the social consequences of algorithmic governance. Her keynote today, From Welfare to Tenant State, State-Tech Relations in an Age of AI, promises to offer a critical perspective on the changing relationships between states, citizenships, and technological power, which we need to discuss clearly. With that, I'd like to now leave the floor to Professor Lina Denzig for today's keynote lecture. Hello and welcome.
Hi there, thank you very much, and thank you for that kind introduction as well. I'd really wanted to attend this conference in person. We were trying to make it work, but with the flight cancellations happening at the moment, it just became a little bit too uncertain. But I really hope to connect with you on another occasion in person, and to visit Cyprus as well on another occasion. I've never been there. But I'm very happy to be able to share some of my current work relating to the state of communication today. As you highlighted, and as the previous speaker also made clear, our media and communication infrastructure has arguably never been more complex, but has also never been regarded to hold such significance for how we then understand social change. The advent of digitalization and the more recent turn to datafication in particular has foregrounded how the mediation of public knowledge and information is really instrumental, not just for understanding our social world, but our very place within it. So how we're able to participate in society, how we're seen and recognized by others, when and where we can express voice, and also what life opportunities might be available to us. So as was already mentioned, I've advanced this notion of data justice over the last decade or so as a framework to make sense of some of the societal implications of datafication, with a particular orientation towards social justice concerns. Data justice, a central contribution of data justice has been to advance a framework for research that seeks to explore what's at stake really with datafication and the more recent iterations of machine learning and AI, beyond kind of narrow confines of efficiency or even privacy that has often framed debates. Because extensive research has now showcased how developments in data-driven technologies are linked to and are contingent on existing and new forms of inequality and domination. So the pioneering work of someone like Oscar Gandhi, for example, provided a very early account of how data-centric information systems operate as systems of control, not just by increasing the potential for monitoring, but as sorting mechanisms of populations. So in the pursuit of detecting and predicting patterns, data-driven technologies are used to identify, categorize, and profile groups based on a range of activities and behavioral data. And this has been shown to disproportionately impact those already marginalized and can lead to forms of stereotyping, stigmatization, and discrimination. And also, as data-driven technologies become embedded in central areas of social and public life, how we're then recognized and the treatment we might receive based on that recognition is increasingly bound up with algorithmic identities that may or may not correspond to our lived experiences. And these processes often lack adequate transparency or accountability mechanisms and are predominantly controlled by opaque and unaccountable private commercial providers. And more recently, authors like Nick Coldry and Elizabeth Machias have argued that the advancement of datafication and the nature of its embeddedness within societies constituted even of a new kind of colonialism in terms of its extraction and exploitation of resources and people, while Foucault and Healy have made the case that we're moving towards what they describe as an ordinal society, in which data-driven technologies are instrumental in forms of ordering and classification systems that then lead to new forms of capital that advantage some and disadvantage others, generating new forms of societal struggles. But although data justice debate therefore draw on a range of disciplines, and media and communication scholars are particularly relevant in these discussions, in part because they've been able to draw on long-standing concerns with how media and communication power relates to other forms of social power, and also for highlighting the contextual importance of understanding how communication systems come to shape how we experience and live in the world. Overwhelmingly, though, engagement with the societal implications of datafication and AI so far has been oriented towards users, culture, labor, and potential shifts in capitalism. But in comparison, although this is changing now, we've had relatively little engagement with transformations of the state and the relationship between emerging technologies and the state, which is what I want to focus on in this talk. Let me see if I can change slide. There we are. So I think, as was mentioned, this is very rapidly becoming a growing orientation, perhaps most notably with a concern with a resurgence of authoritarianism as a manifestation of state-tech relations. This narrative has obviously gained prominence, particularly with the inauguration of President Trump in the United States, with commentators hailing the advent of a new tech autocracy, in which rather than shunning governments, technology companies are now actively seeking to fund, control, and manage how governments engage with technological developments and beyond, often at the expense of public interest. Of course, many would say that the presence of corporate power at the center of the state is really nothing new, particularly not in countries like the United States, and indeed in long histories of colonialism where private companies have been instrumental in ensuring the global dominance of Western powers. And the use of technology has also always been central to the enhancement of state capacities and governance. But at the same time, there is something that suggests that contemporary state-tech relations may present us with a set of challenges that we haven't been confronted with before, especially in this current AI moment. Differing accounts tend to focus on either the takeover of the state or the hollowing out of the state by large technology companies, centralized within a few powerful countries, perhaps most notably the US and China, whereas others have sought to emphasize a resurgence of the state following the financial crisis and its central role in advancing platform capitalism, foregrounding a new era of so-called state capitalism. And often the assessments of contemporary state-tech relations tend to be linked to the geopolitical landscape of AI and where and how different nation-state feature within the world system. Yet across the globe, it's clear that the rapid advancement of AI is an outcome of a potentially new state capital hybrid, existing in variegated forms that requires in-depth analysis and critique. In the UK, for example, where I'm based, We have seen just in the last couple of years what my colleague Becky Kazansky in a project we're currently doing about the relationship or the role of technology companies in advancing AI strategy. She refers to as a kind of agentic dance between government and technology companies in manufacturing a sense of inevitability or a kind of AI realism within society in order to justify and legitimate huge AI investments. At the same time, these investments into AI may also have transformative powers in how the state then come to function and even what we understand by the state. So informed in part by previous research I've done on data justice, a key focus for me in this respect is especially what it might mean for the future of the welfare state as a particular type of state, particularly within Europe. Although sometimes dismissed as irrelevant, the enduring significance of the welfare state is evidenced by unprecedented economic intervention and renewed emphasis on social security and planning that we saw, for example, ushered in by the COVID-19 pandemic. And Europe's responses in particular have been illustrative of a kind of historical commitment to some form of social dimension, often regarded as a neglected aspect of the European project, but also showcasing the extent to which that commitment is now bound up with digital technologies. And in many ways, the pandemic can be regarded as a very significant juncture in the relationship between the state and digital technology, because governments across the world entered into a host of partnerships with organizations at unprecedented speed to extend and create data infrastructures in key areas of public and social life. Indeed, the pandemic made clear not only the continued relevance of the welfare state, but very much the datafied nature of the contemporary and future welfare state, in which data infrastructures and technology companies play a crucial role, both in terms of fulfilling coercive and supportive functions. I'm also interested in the welfare state because it allows for a kind of normative orientation towards the state based on a set of specific values and forms of regulation that focus on the capacity for political regulation of the market economy. So public values that are often associated with the welfare state include, for example, commitments to decommodification, social solidarity, and universalism. And here I'm also engaging with ideas around a European social model, which is closely associated with the welfare state, even though the notion of a European social model has been deemed largely obsolete, both as an aspiration and a reality, particularly in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. But I think it's worth considering, both because of the UK leaving the EU and also the adoption of the European Commission's European Pillar of Social Rights. There are grounds for revisiting the European social model, both in terms of its intended purpose and actual functioning. There have, in fact, been growing efforts within European regulatory frameworks to account for these kinds of social commitments in the face of computational developments that we've seen in initiatives like the EU's Platform Directive and also sections of the AI Act that includes provisions pertaining particularly to social protection and employment. And at a national level, social commitments are often expressed in guidelines on uses of data and AI in the public sector, for example, or a growing algorithm auditing sector, or revised remits of data protection agencies. But there has also been growing recognition amongst policy actors of the continued need to rethink the meaning of a European social model and the unique set of challenges that are involved in transitioning that model to what I've referred to as a kind of European social technical model that's fit for purpose. So although foregrounded and compounded by the pandemic, along with rapid advancements in digital platforms and AI, the datafied welfare state follows a development that has been emerging in several European countries for quite some time. Philip Alston, who used to be the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, argued prior to the onset of the pandemic that the digital welfare state is already a reality or is emerging in many countries across the globe. And in these states, quote, systems of social protection and assistance are increasingly driven by digital data and technologies that are used to automate, predict, identify, surveil, detect, target, and punish. Reports have documented, for example, how users of automated decision-making or decision support systems that rely on the algorithmic processing of data within public bodies are now well established across Europe, most notably in areas of unemployment, benefits, social care, policing, education, and health. Indeed, just in the last year or so, we've seen the proliferation of plans to intensify these processes of datafication across European states, with the rapid advancement of AI in particular, set to significantly transform the economy and public sector, from the integration of AI across healthcare to AI-driven personalization of government services to new large procurements of generative AI provision across national and local authorities. And while there are ongoing efforts to try and map these developments, and there's some theorization beginning to emerge, I still think we lack a proper understanding of how this transformation is going to be delivered, and importantly, by whom and on what terms, and with what implications for the welfare state. Whether we think of state-tech relations in times of crisis, like the role of companies like Apple and Google in providing health-related computational infrastructure during the COVID-19 pandemic across European states, the contracting of data brokers like Experian and Centura by local authorities to inform everyday welfare decisions, or the plans to partner with AI providers like Palantir to streamline public services, we need to ask what the nature is of these relationships. What is the actual role then of digital technology providers in welfare states today? And are we seeing the emergence of a new institutional form based on these state-tech relations? So I just want to say this is what I'm concerned with here. And in talking about the welfare state then, in this context, I'm not really simply talking of a program of social welfare or the provision of social services, but instead drawing on Office understanding of the welfare state. The welfare state here refers to a formula that consists of the explicit obligation of the state to provide assistance and support to those citizens who suffer from specific needs and risks characteristic of the market society, and is based on a recognition of the formal role of labor unions in both collective bargaining and the formation of public policy. So such an understanding requires us to consider the datafied welfare state beyond engagements with the digitalization of public administration or the delivery of public services, which has really dominated research in this area, and consider instead how the advent of platforms and AI relate to institutional formation and state function, and what political realities are possible. As Offer has argued, there was nothing inevitable about the emergence of the welfare state. The welfare state in Europe is a political solution to social contradictions that emerged out of a specific, what he describes as a matrix of social power. So the welfare state was an outcome of the ways in which social classes, collective actors, and other social categories were able to shape the environment of political decision-making. So I think this requires us to consider how state-tech relations in the datafied welfare state exists within and shape matrices of social power. In particular, by engaging with 4 different features of state-tech relations in the datafied welfare state that I'm going to outline in a moment, I want to make the case that what we're witnessing is the advent of what I call a tenant state, in which state-tech relations mimic those of tenants' landlords based on new modes of governance, infrastructural dependencies, economic models, and regulatory capacities that challenge definitions of a European social model. This notion of a tenant state builds on emerging debates on the future of public institutions as operations of the state are increasingly executed through computational infrastructures, and it engages with discussions about their potential displacement in the face of new forms of platform or computational power at the intersections of governance, infrastructure, and market. So these debates push the parameters of how we should understand the intersection of the state and technology, pointing to the complexity and multifaceted nature of computational transformations that suggest that existing frameworks for analyzing this relationship may be inadequate. Instead, we may need to understand state-tech relations as both extending and shifting previous forms of state capital hybrids and public-private partnerships, involving several key significant features of state-tech relations that I'll go on to detail now. So first, it's governmentality. A key focus in research on the growing reliance on data infrastructures in the welfare state is the way this reliance shapes public administration and the delivery of public services. So my own and others' research, for example, has shown how the increasing use of data-driven technologies in the public sector has been significant for changes in expertise, decision-making, and engagement with citizens across public sector bureaucracies. Young has summarized some of this debate as a paradigm shift in public administration from a regime of new public management associated with neoliberalism to a regime of what she describes as new public analytics associated with the use of computational analysis that has its theoretical foundations in data science and statistics. Similarly, Margits and Dolevi identify 3 waves of what they describe as digital era governance that started in the mid-1990s with early forms of digitalization and the early forms of exploring the potential for integration through online services. And then a second wave that constituted designing services as online first and digital by default, and early big data usage and cloud development. And then to our current third wave, which is oriented towards cloud services and the development of data science and AI capabilities, exploring the potential also for new bureaucratic organizational forms. So this suggests a potential transition in governmentality, understood here as the techniques and strategies by which a society is rendered governable, and is distinct from previous modes of governance and statecraft. So building on James C. Scott's very well-known account of the high modernist state, Foucault and Gordon, for example, have argued that we've moved from this high modernist state to the neoliberal state to what they refer to now as the dataist state, where they say that in an age of big data and machine learning, the state's use of technologies heralds a deeper transformation of statecraft itself. And it does so as automation takes over significant parts of state operations and governance becomes oriented towards the identification and legibility afforded through the ubiquitous collection of data. So this dataist state embodies a new form of governmentality, they claim, premised on the notion that a society consists of data flows. The responsibility of the state is to collect and process this data, and a well-governed society is one in which events are aligned with the state's models and predictions, no matter how disorderly in high modernist terms. So the other key feature of state-tech relations I want to discuss is infrastructure. Because importantly, the data state is a culmination of the commingling of private and public actors afforded by technology and the long-standing reorientation of the state to serve the market, but also by privileging data flows and models and predictions garnered from data processing and analysis. The data state is subject to competition from any institution that's able to make, so inverted quote, better predictions or deliver better outcomes. And this therefore tends to move governance into the hands of large corporations who have the computational power and labor to process and analyze large data sets. So the enhanced dependency and concentration that comes with this power of compute has foregrounded an infrastructural approach to understanding platforms and AI, highlighting both the potential public value, but also the embedded nature of such technologies in society and the complex ecosystems that sustain them. Indeed, research on public sector platforms and applications has sought to highlight how central aspects of delivering welfare in European welfare states are now bound up with convoluted third-party infrastructures based on different forms of tracking, storing, and controlling data. And with the growth of foundation models associated with generative AI, Burkhardt and Rieder, for example, have outlined how the platformization afforded by the infrastructure of such models further strengthens big tech's dominance over the field of computing, and through their broad applicability, many other economic sectors as well as governments. A key question then for the datafied welfare state is what an engagement with data-driven technologies at an infrastructural level might reveal about state-tech relations in the kind of matrix of social power we're confronted with today, and whether there might be potential discontinuities in capitalism and how we understand capitalism. So Wark, for example, Mackenzie Wark has argued that the infrastructural power that technology companies now hold has shifted power away from the capitalist class who own the means of production, as we've traditionally understood power in capitalism, towards a new, what they describe as a new victorialist class who own the vectors along which information is gathered and used. So while a capitalist class owns the means of production and the means of organizing labor, a victorious class owns the means of organizing the means of production. So this kind of underlying infrastructural power has arguably shifted power within capitalism. The third feature of contemporary state-tech relations I want to highlight is then this notion of frontierism, which has become a kind of increasingly popular way of thinking about what's happening with technology. So alongside an emphasis on infrastructure, Datafication has also been said to be a political economic regime linked to trends of assetization and financialization, in which data is both valuable and value creating, propelling new ways of doing business and governance. So this is Sadowski's argument, for example. And the aim is to turn everything into a financial asset as a way to latch onto circuits of capital and consumption for the purposes of rent extraction, whether that be in the form of money or data. Payment to an economic actor is made purely by virtue of that actor controlling something valuable or that creates an impression of value, made profitable due to the particular circumstances of a dearth of market competition or monopoly. So although, and this kind of engagement with rentier capitalism is nothing new, but what is new, arguably, are the complex technologies that have been designed to extend and empower capital's abilities of assetization, extraction, and enclosure. Also, the main strategy of rentiers or platforms is to turn social interactions and economic transactions into services that take place on their platform, extending the kind of software as a service model into spheres like transport as a service or even welfare as a service. So this builds on insights into the significance of moving from selling one-off shrink-wrap software to so-called agile production models in computing and engineering that privilege these software as a service products. Particularly illustrative of this shift in production is the establishment of a cloud-based regime in computing that privileges scale over profit, and advancing what Narayan has described as a hyper-outsourced economic model under a paradigm of asset externalization. By understanding this development through the lens of rentierism as the dominant economic model of data-driven innovation, we can see how technology companies advancing these X as a service products or welfare as a service products become embedded within government and public sector bureaucracies. Sharon has referred to this development as sphere transgressions that see this kind of digital know-how and expertise translate into advantages for technology companies in all spheres that are undergoing digitalization, from healthcare to education to social security, regardless of the fact that they lack domain expertise. So by plugging into this political economy of datafication and this logic of rentier capitalism, the datafied welfare state therefore not only advances the commodification of information about its citizens and the outsourcing of services, but also becomes locked in to a form of social ordering that restructures practices to uphold this political economy and the continued generation of data. Then finally, a key concern here is what this then means for the capacity for political regulation of the market economy, particularly in negotiating between capital and labor as a key feature of the welfare state and of a European social model. Ferrari, for example, argues that the common understanding of the state as a regulator of platforms doesn't adequately account for the other key functions of the state, namely facilitator, buyer, and producer, that all enable or constrain the agency of the state to regulate platforms. While the dilemmas between these different functions may not be new, Ferrari argues that they've become a defining feature of state platform relations in which the state is having to regulate while also facilitate platform capitalism, and importantly, acts primarily as a buyer of platforms and AI and less as a producer. And this has then significant consequences for the state's abilities to act as a regulator and how that regulation is pursued. So research I've done together with Jedrick Nicholas on the place on social and economic rights in recent policy debates on AI within Europe, for example, has shown that these tend to be subsumed within a market-oriented approach that favors a political orientation towards consumer and civic rights. In other words, the dual objective that has always guided digital strategy in Europe, which seeks to strengthen a common competitive market for services and products on the one hand, and introduce measures for market correction on the other, has provided a strategic framework for legitimizing market growth in relation to data and AI by privileging individual consumer and political rights over collective and economic rights that are more closely linked to welfare state functions. And also the ability of platforms to both create and control markets has been shown to undermine and bypass any formal role of labor unions, continuing to challenge regulatory mechanisms in place to protect citizens against market risks. I think this is particularly important in light of discussions on the way industrial policy now features data-driven innovation, particularly AI, with emerging research on national growth strategies showing that the overriding objective of digital growth that has dominated welfare state strategies in Europe paradoxically produce retrenchment of welfare state capabilities and critical assets. So Mazzucato and Collington have made the case that a key aspect of the retrenchment is not only the transfer of expertise to private actors, but the obfuscation of accountability that comes with the way these actors are embedded at the center of government operations. So there is, in other words, a significant tension and possible contradiction between the advancement of platforms and AI as industrial policy that we see states carry out and the capacity of the welfare state to meet its obligations towards citizens. So these features therefore indicate that state-tech relations in the datafied welfare state may be giving rise to a new institutional reform, what I refer to as the tenant state, that has significant implications for the functions of the state and commitments to a European social model, including public values and public infrastructure that are meant to protect citizens against market risks. Indeed, there may be grounds for rethinking what tools and responses are needed to engage with this institutional form, and whether those that have been leveraged in response to neoliberalism, for example, such as an emphasis on public ownership or bringing services in-house, even makes sense in light of the kind of features that I've discussed today. We might also have to consider how the current matrix of social power that underpins this tenant state can be challenged to allow for other social technical models to be imagined, and consider what other political realities might be possible. In other words, how might the power dynamics of state-tech relations, as I've outlined them in the datafied welfare state, be different? And of course, what role can a field like data justice play? Of course, state-tech relations in the datafied welfare state is bound up with a range of historical inequalities and disparate impact and experiences between different communities. But data justice debates have tended to focus on data as an entry point, often attributing harms to technological features, most notably the notion of algorithmic bias, and also seeking data governance as the dominant response to justice concerns. But I wonder whether this is still relevant in the current AI moment in light of the power dynamics of state-tech relations that I've discussed. Some have argued that data governance remains at the center of ensuring the fair advancement of AI in the public interest. And someone like Linda Taylor, for example, has outlined a number of important benchmarks for what such governance might look like. But I think what I've discussed here today demonstrates that the current AI moment is bound up with both computational features, like questions of infrastructure and questions of production models, as well as geopolitical developments that significantly undermine the potential for data governance and data justice more broadly. At one level, this is a question that invites reflections on how data justice might be advanced outside existing governance institutions, and maybe think about how solidarity and advocacy might be fostered. There's a growing, I think, orientation towards notions of a politics of refusal that in part draws on longer standing abolitionist traditions that seek to consider how big data might be abolished to divert resources towards community empowerment. Recently, there's been a resurgence of neo-Luddism that seeks to advance Luddite politics in the context of datafication. But we also need to recognize that governance agendas can be moved or overturned, but only with political pressure that might come from these kinds of efforts. So how can we link a framework for just data governance to justice-oriented political mobilization as two reinforcing aspects of data justice? The current AI moment presents a particularly challenging environment for that exercise, but it also makes it more pressing than ever. While previous iterations of datafication have often been said to be advanced under a veil of obscurity, wherein interests and relations are often hidden and they have to be uncovered, the current AI moment is defined by its open display of powerful interests, shaping what technological futures we might be offered. Both governments and technology companies are openly aligning strategically around the more or less frictionless advancement of AI across economies. Such close consensus in elite interests is challenging for mobilizing around data justice, but also presents certain opportunities. In part, the current consensus around AI is also marred by intense competition between stakeholders that can be exploited for public interest. So recent efforts in Europe, for example, have sought to mobilize around digital sovereignty, long-standing orientation within digital strategy, but has gained renewed currency in light of geopolitical concerns, evidenced, for example, with the recently launched Eurostack initiative. And public interest is often touted as central to this vision, and there's an ambition to draw a direct link between democracy and computational infrastructure. But more broadly, mobilization around data justice requires solidarity across different groups and communities that may not previously have seen connections, but might do so in light of the current AI moment. In other words, the openness around the strategic alignment of interest amongst political and economic elites also has the potential to ignite a strategic alignment of interest amongst non-elites who might stand to be particularly vulnerable or harmed by the current AI moment, even if the mobilization isn't explicitly targeted at data governance or data at all. As we argue in our book, Data Justice, political mobilization emerges in the strategic logics, to quote Eric Olin Wright, that seek to dismantle the systems that underpin the power of datafication through different repertoires of action. What unites them is a need to tackle the actual conditions that lead to experiences of injustice as they exist on the ground. Such conditions, I would argue, are being made explicit in this current AI moment. So even though we're faced with state tech power laid bare in many ways, and the mask is off, perhaps precisely because we are in such a moment, this is when our jobs as critical media and communication scholars might be to find those cracks for the light to come through. I'll end there. Thank you.
And comprehensive discussion that touched on a variety of dimensions of data justice. I'm going to turn quickly to the hall to see if there are any questions, and perhaps the control room will be projecting the questions if there are any on the YouTube channel. There's actually some, you've talked about this in a slightly different context. And your approach, although very multidimensional, provided us with a holistic view of the issue. I'm wondering if I could sort of a little bit challenge you in asking something that would be of interest a lot to me. It would be very interesting to see how your holistic view would comment on that. Yesterday, Professor Mika Modianu, during their keynote speech, woke me up. to be honest, to the fact that something that we take for granted, the abilities of technology like facial recognition, is very racist indeed. I was wondering, of course, your context is European social state, welfare state, and you're discussing the social technical model and this transformation to more of a tenant state. But Europe isn't just where Europeans live in terms of race and ethnicity. And if we're going to talk about justice, we need to sort of be able to understand it at the micro level as well, where people are, walking about and their facial recognition is being algorithmically statistified, I suppose, in a way. I was wondering if you could comment on the challenge how would you conceptualize this challenge within the challenges that you've already shared with us?
Yeah, I mean, of course, a lot of my work leading up to this current focus I have now on the welfare state dealt with those kinds of questions around the disparate impact of technology on different communities, often bound up with questions of ethnicity, gender, age, mobility, all of these kinds of issues that have been long-standing in social justice debates. And of course, a key focus of the Data Justice Lab in setting that up about 10 years ago was to try and reframe the discussion around data towards these kind of long-standing concerns within within social justice, and how showcasing the extent to which technology questions are deeply embedded within debates on social justice, or should be embedded within social justice concerns. And of course, the welfare state has a history of inequality and discrimination as well. And of course, these two join together, and that's very evident in, there's lots of studies that have shown the extent to which the reliance on these technologies within the welfare state have led to continued issues around discrimination and inequality that continue to sort of showcase those kinds of issues that, for example, I'm sure Mika mentioned around migration and facial recognition. Obviously, she's my colleague. I'm very familiar with her work. So I think that continues to inform this. And I think what I want to the reason I'm interested in this kind of state-tech relations and the kind of more political economy question around what does that then mean for the welfare state is the way it limits possibilities to challenge that way of governing. As these technologies become embedded within the state and the welfare state, that form of decision making and that way of understanding what social issues are, and therefore what are appropriate responses, becomes not only embedded within the state, but this dependency makes it very difficult to then change what the welfare state might be and how it might operate differently. And therefore the impact that these decisions can have on people's lives are harder to challenge. So that's why I'm obviously informed by these data justice debate, concerned about this kind of bigger question around how the state can then function, and also then the possibilities for making it different in light of its impact on people's lives. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And there's one of our graduate students is wondering how all the things that you've discussed can be helped by communication graduates, and I suppose not scholars, but communication graduates who are going to go out to practice media.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it depends what kind of where they're wanting to be situated, but I think there's definitely scope for people who study these things and go out into the work to question and query the institutions that they end up in terms of their dependency, for example, on certain types of technologies, but perhaps also, if depending on where they work, the extent to which these technologies should be advanced in particular contexts. So allowing for refusal, allowing for a querying of premise. Is it appropriate for these technologies to exist within the context that they're currently being adopted within? And then perhaps more broadly, I think that we're seeing is, I think I'm doing this project I'm doing with, I mentioned my colleague Becky Kasansky, we're doing around also the influence of big tech, particularly on AI strategy, and looking at things like lobbying, for example, and so forth. We have focused on this question around sustainability and how big tech large technology companies are shaping our understanding of the relationship between AI and sustainability. But we're now seeing that kind of discourse that they have sought to advance, which has very much been about AI is the solution to climate change. AI is a key factor in advancing sustainability, has kind of ruptured in a way. And we see now kind of data centers becoming a whole new focus for resistance and activism around AI. And this is where, in the last part of my talk, this thinking about how people who might be impacted in different ways that may or may not actually be about data as such can strategically align to challenge some of the ways in which AI is negatively impacting on people's lives in lots of different contexts. So I think there are definitely opportunities for people who are engaging with critical questions around what AI is and how and its premise to take some of that critical thinking into whatever institutions they go on to work within. And outside in society, just by being citizens, I suppose.
Yes, it kind of brings us back to what Professor Vicente started with, the need to actually approach everything into transdisciplinary, in a transdisciplinary way, I suppose, and that is included. Thank you very much. Hope you're able to stay with us for our next keynote speech. Due to time, I'm going to have to move on through the program. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
Hopefully you stay with us and we'll be back
will
again
do.
shortly. Evet, son keynote konuşmacımız King's College London'dan Dr. Nick Sneak. Dr. Sneak, I'll have to ask for his apologies because I'm having difficulty pronouncing his surname at times. Dr. Sneak, dijital ekonomi, yapay zeka, platform kapitalizmi ve çalışma sonrası gelecekler üzerine çalışan en etkili çağdaş düşünürlerden biri. Çalışmaları medya çalışmaları, ekonomi, politik ve teknoloji araştırmaları alanında dijital altyapılar ile çağdaş kapitalizm arasındaki ilişkinin anlaşılmasında belirleyici bir yere sahip. Önemli yayınlar arasında Politik tarafından 2025 yılında yayımlanan Silicon Empires: The Fight for the Future of AI, Helen Hester ile birlikte kaleme aldığı Verso yayınlarından 2023 yılında yayımlanan After Work: A History of the Home and the Fight for Free Time, Politik tarafından 2016'da yayımlanan Platform Capitalism, and Alex Williams ile birlikte yazdığı Verso tarafından 2015 yılında yayımlanan Inventing the Future, Post-Capitalism and the World Without Work bulunuyor. Platform şirketlerinin iletişimi, emeği, kültürü ve hatta siyasal yaşamı giderek daha fazla şekillendirdiği günümüzde Profesör Sneak'in çalışmaları Silikon İmparatorluğu'nun yükselişini anlamamız için son derece önemli bir çerçeve sunuyor. Diğer takdimlerde olduğu gibi İngilizce takdimden sonra sözü kendisine bırakacağım. Last but obviously not least, our final keynote speaker today is Dr. Nick Sneak from King's College, London. Dr. Sneak is one of the most influential contemporary thinkers working on the digital economy, artificial intelligence, platform capitalism, and post-work futures. His work has fundamentally shaped the way scholars across media studies, political economy, and technology studies understand the relationship between digital infrastructures and contemporary capitalism. Among his major publications are Silicon Empires: The Fight for the Future of AI, published by Polity in 2025, After Work: A History of the Home and the Fight for Free Time, co-authored with Helen Hester and published by Verso in 2023, Platform Capitalism, published by Polity in 2016, and Inventing the Future: Post-Capitalism and a World Without Work. Can't even say it. We'll see if it's possible. Co-authored with Alex Williams and published by Verso in 2015. I'm really looking forward to that discussion. A time when platform corporations increasingly shape communication, labor, culture, and even political life. Dr. Sneak's work provides a vital framework for understanding the rise of what he calls Silicon Empires. It is a great pleasure to hand over the floor to Professor Nick Sneak, and I firstly apologize for not being able to pronounce it. I've worked on it too much. I think that's the reason. That's the reason it's not working now. Too much practice makes it worse. Apologies for that again, and welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And no worries about the name. Everybody messes it up, and I'm always interested to see how people try and pronounce it. But it's just Nick Cernick. So yes, so it's really lovely to be here. I wish I could have been there in person, but it just didn't work out in terms of timings. But yeah, I hope people get a lot out of my talk today. I'm going to be talking about my latest book, Silicon Empires, and I'm going to sort of give a sort of highlights of this book, the argument for it, but also because I finished writing the book a year ago now, actually, so April of last year, and a year in the world of AI is an eternity, and so things have changed, and I'll try and point out and sort of update, areas where I think the book is sort of missing what's changed, and how things might be improved in it. Okay, so fundamental to to my book is this question of AI value. So the question of where is this value going to? And I think if we look at the stock markets today, there's a very simple answer as to where AI value is going, which is NVIDIA. All of this money ends up flowing into NVIDIA's pockets. And you can see it in charts like this with ChatGPT being released in November of 2022 and NVIDIA's market capitalization just skyrocketing afterwards. And they were not a small company by any means before ChatGPT, but since the dominance of this particular transformer architecture for generative AI and the need for large amounts of compute, NVIDIA has been really benefiting from this generative AI moment, and that's where the value seems to be going so far. However, this is sort of a common story of general purpose technologies, is that the early winners of these technologies don't often end up being the winners in the long run. And I think if we look around today, we see that there's a lot of headwinds against NVIDIA continuing to dominate into the future. So we've got all of the big tech companies in America, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, trying to develop alternatives to NVIDIA's chips so that they don't have to be dependent on that company. And by most accounts, Google's TPU chips are very, very effective, very efficient, and for their price, very good. We also have the Chinese ecosystem. So Huawei, Alibaba, and Baidu, all of them are also creating significant alternatives to NVIDIA GPUs. On top of that, we have the Chinese government, which is increasingly saying to its companies, to its state-owned enterprises, to its government agencies, that you cannot buy NVIDIA chips. So even as America starts to let Chinese companies buy some of these chips, the Chinese government, by contrast, is saying no. So this is a massive market which is being cut off for NVIDIA. And again, it's a major headwind in terms of capturing value into the future. Now, in the book, really central to this, sorry, can everybody hear me? Hopefully people can. In the book, really central to the story that I'm trying to tell is this idea that AI, as we know it today, is a general purpose technology. So this is a concept from economics, and traditionally, a general purpose technology is understood to have three different characteristics. One is that these technologies are broadly applicable across an economy. So it's not just the case that they sort of work within a particular industry or a particular business, but in fact, there's something which can be applied to almost any business within an economy. These technologies, though, also require what are called complementary innovations in different areas. So take, for instance, the steam engine. The invention of the steam engine is a general purpose technology, but then the steam engine which goes into powering a factory is very different from the steam engine which goes into powering a locomotive or something like that. And to make these things work in these different scenarios, you have to have these sort of complementary innovations added on top. The third key characteristic is that general purpose technologies have this capacity for significant internal development. So again, thinking about the steam engine, it wasn't the case that we invented the steam engine and then that was the end of the story. Instead, the steam engine continued to be improved. It was made more efficient, more powerful, more compact and smaller. All of these things are characteristic of general purpose technologies. Now, really important to the story that I want to tell is this distinction in general purpose technologies between that sort of general technology and the specific application that's made of it. So the diagram here on the screen comes from the earliest economic formalization of general purpose technologies. And you can see what I sort of have in mind here. So the semiconductor as a general technology, but then the semiconductors which go into each of these different devices is quite different and requires different, innovations, different constraints, different components, different sort of, design choices and things like that going into them. Now, this distinction between the general and the specific has a lot of, I think, really important implications. One is that there is a challenge for the companies which are producing a general purpose technology. And that challenge is, how do you actually diffuse that technology? And we can see this today when we look around at the attempts by companies to get AI introduced into different companies, into different industries. The sort of challenge is that as a company which has produced a general purpose technology, you're very good at doing that, but you're not very good at doing these sort of downstream applications. So OpenAI, for instance, very good at producing large language models, but that doesn't mean that they have any capacity to do healthcare services or legal services or financial services. So the challenge is that these companies are reliant upon others to actually take up this technology. Now, one really interesting sort of evolution of this, which emerged after I wrote the book, is the rise of what's called forward deployed engineers. So this is a role which OpenAI started to use, Anthropic has started to use, and just yesterday, Google announced that they're going to hire a bunch of these workers as well. And basically what this role is it's people working for these AI labs who go out and work very closely with a customer to try and understand how to adapt and adopt AI into this particular company. So in this case, in the image, we've got an OpenAI engineer, a forward deployed engineer, who's gone and worked with John Deere. And you get this sort of virtuous cycle of GPTs, where these FDEs, as the quote says here, also align with OpenAI's research objectives and work with customers who can most likely build solutions that help advance the research direction at OpenAI. So I'll give an example here, which is, in this case, they went and worked with John Deere. They found that the AI model wasn't working well enough in terms of recognizing voices and doing sort of voice interaction. They improved that for John Deere, and then they rolled that complementary innovation back into the core ChatGPT model, so it became available to everybody. So this is a role which directly tries to face up to this challenge of, how do you get your technology into the hands of all these downstream businesses? Now, the second challenge for these companies, the big AI labs, is a really crucial one, which is, how do you actually capture the value? And if we look at the history of general purpose technologies, it's actually, it looks like it's really bad for the people who are producing GPTs. So one of the really common sort of themes within the literature around GPTs is that most of the value from these technologies goes to the downstream applications, and it goes to users, it goes to consumers, it goes everywhere else except to the people who are actually producing this technology. And so a common sort of theme within, a common refrain, I guess, within the literature is that government needs to step in to incentivize people to build GPTs. Because otherwise there's no sort of rationale to do it. So traditionally, capturing that value from producing a GPT has been really difficult. So in response to particularly that challenge, I think amongst the big AI companies, there's 4 sort of main strategies that they're taking up. And there's more, I think, as well, but these are the 4 key ones that I think are really important at the moment. So I'll go through each of these in a bit more depth. The first of these is the infrastructure strategy, and we can look to Amazon, Microsoft, Alibaba as key examples of this. And the idea here is to maximize the usage of any AI model whatsoever. Doesn't matter which one, as long as they're running it on your cloud infrastructure, you are then able to capture some of that value. And so the idea here is that you can capture value by taking a little slice of every single AI use. So the sort of rentier capitalism elements that Lena was talking about is that sort of thing for the AI world, providing that infrastructure, capturing a rent by providing it. Now, in terms of the strategy, it dictates a certain series of behaviors. One of these is to try and get as much AI supply onto your platform. So trying to get lots of different AI models, doing partnerships with different AI labs and AI startups, offering cloud credits for startups to build on your particular platform, and then also trying to increase the demand on your platform. And this is primarily through trying to make it easier for customers to use AI. So you see these companies offering, for instance, a lot of training programs for free, especially oriented towards small businesses and individual users and things like that. So trying to increase demand on their platform. One example of this is AWS's, Amazon's generative AI accelerator. And you can see sort of the broad sort of array of benefits for companies that sign up to this particular thing. And I'll just note that it includes up to $1 million in cloud credits. So for any sort of startup, could be quite a lot of money, as long as you build your startup on Amazon's platform. Now, the second strategy is what in the book I call a frontier strategy, but I also think a hub strategy is a good name for it. And this is probably the most visible one because it's the strategy that's been chosen by OpenAI, by Anthropic, by DeepSeek. And here the fundamental goal is to maximize the usage of a specific AI model. And especially what I think these companies are trying to do is to become the hub of an ecosystem where they can then capture value. So we might imagine, for instance, the way in which Apple as a company dominates its particular ecosystem, all the developers which are reliant upon it, all the supply chain providers which are reliant upon Apple. And then Apple's power within that ecosystem means that it is able to capture a huge amount of value. And this is what I think the AI companies are sort of aspiring to here. Now, really crucial to this particular strategy is that you have a model which is better than the others, or at least different in some significant way. You don't want to be competing on price, because if you start competing on price, you end up just losing any sort of capacity to gain profit margins and dominate an ecosystem. And I think an increasingly important element of this strategy is also to build a closed ecosystem. So we can sort of understand, I think, some of Anthropic's recent moves as attempts to sort of prevent third-party apps from accessing Claude and instead trying to roll it into a closed ecosystem. Another good example of this is OpenAI's Apps SDK, so Software Development Kit. And this is something which responds to this question of how do you integrate an AI model with an external service, so something like Uber or Spotify. And there's a couple of different ways in which you might answer that particular question. The way in which OpenAI chose is that the apps will appear within ChatGPT, but it does so in a closed way. So when a developer is writing the code in order to allow their app to appear within ChatGPT, that code only works for OpenAI. It doesn't work for Claude. It doesn't work for Gemini. It doesn't work for any other AI system. It's a closed approach. And that's not the only way this question could have been answered. So you could have, for instance, had ChatGPT appear in an app. So you open up Spotify and you've got access to ChatGPT there. Or you could have had an open protocol, like this thing called MCP apps, which basically means that when you are writing the code for your app to appear in an AI chatbot, that code then works for every AI chatbot. So it's not a sort of proprietary closed-in system. OpenAI chose the closed version because that's part of this frontier strategy. Now, the third strategy I want to talk about is the conglomerate strategy, which is fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. And I think there's only two companies which are really doing it so far, which is Google and Huawei. And here the idea is that you don't just build that general purpose technology, the sort of general LLM model. Instead, you're actually building and supporting downstream applications quite directly. And the most visible sort of element of this is that these companies are building very domain-specific models. So Google has, for instance, a model for chemistry, for biology, for protein folding, for mathematics, for all these different things. It's not just focused on that general technology. So this is an attempt by these companies to really reach down into these downstream applications and actually capture value through that way. Another good example of this is Huawei's Pangu Mine model. So this is a domain-specific model built by Huawei for just for the mining industry. And it sort of reflects as well the nature of the Chinese economy, sort of the key industries within the country. And it's, it's not a general purpose model. It is a model designed for one thing. Now, the last strategy I want to talk about from these AI companies is the open strategy. And when I wrote the book, it was Meta, which was the dominant example. And Meta seems to be turning away from open weight AI. Alibaba last year was the big prominent example of open source AI for the world, really. However, this year, Alibaba seems to be stepping back from this particular strategy as well, which means there's fewer and fewer companies that are really doing this strategy. The idea, though, is that you train a big model and then you actually release the effective model for free for people to use. And the idea is that you can capture value, not through necessarily a direct monetary way, but instead by allowing people to play with your model. They add, new features to it. They make it more efficient. They do all this sort of decentralized innovation. And then you can roll that free innovation that's been produced back into your core model. So Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, from Meta, has been very open about this. And he says, even if it costs them billions of dollars to train these models, they can save tens of billions of dollars by sort of exploiting this decentralized innovation. So this is, a quite different strategy from the others. In terms of behaviors for this strategy, a really key thing is that these companies have to develop close relationships with the developer communities and the sort of hobbyist communities, the people who are actually playing with these models and innovating with them and trying to, improve them in various ways. So there's quite a close relationship that ends up being developed between these companies and the developers. Now, those are 4 different strategies, and I think there's a number of sort of interesting implications that we can draw from that. One is that these companies are all competing to capture value in the AI world, but they're doing so in quite different ways. So we shouldn't be trying to think that they're in direct competition with each other. They're in competition in a way which is often, sometimes they can work together and sometimes they're just at odds with each other. I think there's also some really interesting implications in terms of the tensions between these different strategies and also where different strategies might just completely fall apart and others may benefit. I won't go through this particular chart that I have here in a lot of depth, but I'll give one example to illustrate, which is DeepSeek released their R1 model in January of 2025. And it was a major shock to the Western world because it was a really powerful model which had been trained on for not a lot of money. And for the frontier AI companies, this was a big shock. And for NVIDIA, it was a massive hit to their potential business. Do we need all of this compute? So those companies really saw it as a negative thing. However, at the same time, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, came out and he said that DeepSeek was great. The R1 model was great. And the reason why he would say that is because he has an infrastructure strategy. And for an infrastructure strategy, it meant that running AI was cheaper. It would be easier for people to do. And so therefore more people would be using AI and therefore the infrastructure strategy would benefit from it. So that particular moment, the DeepSeek release, had very different impacts on each of these companies. And I think we can only understand that by recognizing the very different strategies that these companies are taking up. Now, in my last section here, I just want to sort of briefly talk about the issue of geopolitics, because this is sort of, as the other commentators have all put it, is central to thinking about AI today. And this is not unique to AI. And in fact, general purpose technologies have often been historically central to major transformations in the balance of international power. So every great power today and every wannabe great power is now thinking about how do we use AI to try and consolidate our position within the 21st century. And in my book, I try and set out the different sort of strategies that particularly America and China are taking up in terms of exporting their AI to the rest of the world. So the sort of quasi and sometimes openly imperialist elements of this particular expansion. And from the American perspective, it seems to me that the world is very clearly divided between the US and China. And some of Trump's sort of recent actions maybe blur that, but I think there's a very strong contingent now within the US government for saying that there is a binary divide in conflict and competition between the US and China. And what the US has been doing as a result is trying to leverage its control of the most advanced AI technologies in return for the expansion of its AI stack. And it's been particularly doing this through bilateral deals. So it's got deals with the UAE, with Saudi Arabia, with Japan, with South Korea, with the UK. Each of these is an attempt to try and shape the way in which those countries are taking up AI and doing so in a way which benefits the US. Trump's AI action plan explicitly calls for quote unquote full stack AI export packages. And there's been a number of new initiatives announced to try and expand the US stack as well. There's this thing called Pax Silica, which is an attempt to build a sort of formal alliance to secure the supply chain of AI. And then there's this Tech Corp initiative, which is trying to get young American engineers to go out to foreign governments and basically help them adopt American AI. And then lastly, particularly under the Trump administration, there's been a real, outright ignoring and sometimes antagonism towards any international regulation of AI. So this is a very what America says is what goes sort of framework. By contrast, China has a quite different approach. And I think part of this is a matter of China sort of opportunistically taking advantage of, what I would call strategic missteps by the US. So as the US steps back from international efforts, China has been stepping up to take a leading role within shaping global governance efforts. It's put forth, proposals for how to govern AI at a global level. It's been pushing for various international standards around AI safety and technical issues. And it's become the most vocal supporter and supplier of open source AI around the world. So lots and lots of companies, especially in Africa, who are picking up Chinese AI because it's open source. And then, at least rhetorically, China's also been offering support to global South countries to build up their technological capabilities. I don't think this has amounted to much in practice yet, but it's a very different rhetorical position, at least, than what America is saying, which is it's us or, we will demolish you, basically. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is, and it sort of gets to some of the themes that Lena was talking about, the way in which the US state is, I think, in a much more confused position than it has been for a while with respect to the role of American technology and American power. It was the case, I think, particularly under Obama, that what Silicon Valley wanted was what Washington wanted. And so there was this merging of interest between the tech elite and the political elite within America. However, I think that's collapsed, in part because of Trump, but I think there's also long-standing secular trends which have caused this. And we have a series of different groups which has emerged within America. There is the, I think, traditional neoliberal big tech companies. So we can think again, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Meta. These are companies which make loads of money. They have, well-established businesses which are just generating a huge amount of cash. And they were companies which were built within a global neoliberal world. They thrived within a global neoliberal world. And they don't want the sort of geopolitical tensions that we see going on today. They don't want tariff uncertainties. They want to be able to sell their services wherever possible, to put their data centers wherever possible, and to, arbitrage wage labor around the world in order to get the lowest labor costs for their businesses as well. They want a neoliberal world. By contrast, in America, we also have a rising techno-nationalist scene. And I think the clearest expression of this is the defense tech sector. So Palantir, Anduril, which just had a $61 billion valuation, Shield AI, some other companies as well. And then sort of following them is venture capital, which has been seeking after the next big thing, and defense tech is it. And so this group of people, they want geopolitical tensions. It's very good for their business to have governments spending loads of money on, rearming themselves and things like that. Their interests are in things like reindustrialization and securing supply chains. So it's not just a matter of, where can we get the cheapest labor, which is a sort of neoliberal position. Instead, it's about how do we ensure that our supply chains are always either domestically, situated or with allies that we can really trust. And then this group also has support for a lot of industrial policy and regulations that might hinder foreign companies and foreign countries as well. A very different perspective on the world than the neoliberalists. And then I think there's also the AI startups, which are sort of situated in a between position. Crucial to these companies, especially it's OpenAI and Anthropic, is that they are desperate for money. They're constantly needing to raise new money in order to continue this sort of race that they have going on. Government contracts are a lucrative opportunity, so they're now turning quite significantly towards that. Sovereign wealth funds, especially from the Gulf states, are one of the few sort of groups which can offer enough capital for these companies. And then they're also trying to really directly pick out markets that they can work in that might offer the most profit. So OpenAI and Anthropic, for instance, are both working on healthcare and finance because those are massive, massive markets. And so they're trying to generate a lot of profits through that. And then lastly, I would say that we have the sort of idiosyncratic elements of Trump himself and the coalition that's been built up around him. We have libertarians, which are demolishing state research capacity at the same time that you might want, more government funding put into fundamental research. You have the MAGA nationalists, which are, fueling this quite fascist mass deportation program and scaring away foreign researchers from America at the same time that America might want the best global talent to be coming to it. And then you have Trump himself, with all these quite bellicose statements to US allies, which, he's telling Europe, I want you on the AI stack, and then also making Europe extremely wary of being dependent on the US AI stack. So these sorts of things are all contradictions within this particular American system at the moment. And then lastly, I'll just point to some tendencies, I think, that emerge from all of this, sort of provocations. It's unclear where things might head, but here's some ideas. One idea is that there might be a decoupling of hemispherical stacks. So an American AI stack and a Chinese AI stack, and never the twain shall meet. I think that's quite unlikely for political, economic, and technical reasons, but it is a possibility. More likely is a sort of overlapping of distinct technological stacks, which then allows middle powers to sort of do what scholars have called polyalignment. So sort of playing off China and America against each other and trying to get a better deal through negotiations. There's been a multiplication of digital sovereignty projects. Every country increasingly seems to want some modicum of AI sovereignty. And then I think one of the big open questions is precisely this ongoing struggle over the hegemonic vision of technology within the US. So is it going to be the sort of neoliberal vision, or is it going to be this more techno-nationalist vision? And I don't think that there is an assured answer to that at the moment. Neither is obviously good, but sort of just diagnosing the situation, that seems to be where we are. And then lastly, We saw this in the flare-up between Anthropic and the Department of Defense within America. Department of Defense wanting to be able to use these AI systems for whatever purposes they saw fit, and Anthropic saying, no, we have certain red lines that we don't want these systems used for, and the massive blow-up between those two sides. That, I think, is a preview of what's going to happen increasingly more frequently over the coming years. This tension between private capital and the states, I think, is something which it isn't harmonious, and there will be a lot of tensions that emerge in the future. And I shall leave it at that. Thank you very much.
For your question, I'm going to quickly turn to the hall to see if there are any questions. Sure. Let's turn these on. So this one as well. Okay. Oh, okay. There's a miscommunication of gestures. There's a question online. Oh, right. Okay. Thank you very much. Right. We've got a question asking, in an era shaped by AI and digital platforms, how can communication education help students critically engage critically challenge corporate and governmental control for information? So what should our role be in making it better and not standing for, choosing something among the worst kind of situation, which is why we've kind of forgotten that after Trump anyway. But let's say we're there. What can we do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think there's two ways to sort of take this. One is the sort of preventative element. So thinking about how AI increasingly allows for the generation of realistic images, videos, sound, and can fake anybody. The ways in which this can really pollute the information sphere and make it increasingly difficult to understand what truth is in the world and what truth isn't. And I think there's a really important role for for media and communication scholars to be thinking about how we battle that particular challenge. And sort of thinking about the sort of risks that are emerging and growing as this technology develops. So I think that's one side of the equation. The other side is, I think, moving beyond that sort of reactive stance, but instead actually thinking about what a positive and different vision might look like in the future. And I think I personally have some optimism about this, which is the ways in which these AI technologies might allow us to sort of escape some of the real problems that social media has posed for us, for instance. So I'll give a simple example, which is social media is driven by advertising money, which has fostered this recommendation algorithms that are based upon engagement and clickbait and things which go viral and things which are really sort of things which grab people, but which may not necessarily be true. So we have an increasingly a world of information that's driven by engagement rather than by the pursuit of truth or something like that. And I think with AI, we have the possibility to, for instance, develop AI agents which are going out and finding us the information that we want and doing so and then presenting us to it in a way which isn't about clickbait or engagement or capturing advertising dollars or anything like that. And there's ways in which you can, create your own sort of system that's highly personalized to you, reflecting of your interest and your engagement with the world. That I think is, I know of people already building this sort of stuff, and I think there is a real optimistic potential for using this technology in beneficial ways. So moving beyond just that sort of, here are the problems, we need to fix them, instead thinking about a complete, alternative to what we have.
That's quite interesting that your response kind of brought us back to yesterday's keynote speech, which reminded me of the lecture we had where we sort of discussed, yes, fake news is there, and that we turn and find AI involved. However, it's quite possible to verify, fact check through AI as well. And I suppose it's how we approach it and what we do with it, really. Thank you very much, Professor Cernek. I think I've stressed about that so much, but it's just not worked. But thank you very much. I'm just gonna, obviously our next panel in this venue, as well as other panels taking place around the faculty and online, will commence at 1 a.m. So we have very little break for lunch. But I just want to really quickly, for a couple of minutes, turn to our keynote speakers who've been with us throughout the morning, and see if they'd like to comment on each other's work or ask each other a question before we close the session. That silence usually says to me no in lectures. I'm going to take it to signify the same thing in this context. So thank you very much for being with us and enlightening and broadening our perspectives on such a contemporary and broad issue. Once again, thank you for being with us. Evet, biraz önce söylediğim gibi, İngilizce söylediğim gibi hem bu mekanda hem de fakültenin diğer farklı odalarında gerçekleşen panellerimiz, ayrıca online devam eden panellerimiz saat 1 itibariyle başlayacak. Bizimle olduğunuz için çok teşekkürler. İyi günler.